You know, life as a kid was pretty darn cool. I remember growing up in grade school, they sold these pieces of paper that had tickets on them for movies that you could get for $10, and it would last you the entire summer break. You could get a thing of popcorn, soda, and candy for $2 each time you went, provided your parents gave you some money to do that. Life was pretty cool, like I said. I mean, you look back at some of these movies now that you've grown up, especially me, and you can kind of see where the magic wears off a bit, but you can still go back and watch them and enjoy them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the movie because of its age. I mean, heck, the older Star Wars movies are a lot better than the newer ones, in my opinion at least. That's not to say that all movies don't have their flaws, far from it. Today we're going to go ahead and look back at one of the movies that I really enjoyed as a kid. Now sit back, relax, while I ruin your childhood! What? Nah, I'm just kidding. This is The Borrower'S. The movie The Borrower'S is based off a book series that was written by Mary Norton. You know, I never got the chance to read those as a kid, but doing the little bit of research I did, I wish that I had. It's a pretty interesting little story. The idea of little people running around, borrowing things from around your house and never being seen. This whole secret society of people that nobody knows exists. It's pretty cool. It actually reminded me of another book that was made into a movie that I did read, The Indian in the Cupboard. Now, you know how people always argue the point that books are way better than the movie, and in a lot of instances that's true. Indian in the Cupboard, I really agree with that. But you can't take a book and do it verbatim, because there's so many things that could possibly go wrong, or there's just not the best thing to do, okay? Here's why. First off, it'd be way too long. Movies ranging from 7 to 8 hours would be the norm. Secondly, your own imagination is always better than leaving it up to a handful of people to tell you what they envisioned. Thirdly, producing a movie that large and epic constantly would possibly drive up costs of movie tickets, DVDs, etc. Though I don't think the movie theaters got the memo on why that was a bad idea in terms of concessions. Yes, I understand that concessions are priced higher because that's where the movie theater makes its money. Because most of the ticket cost goes to leasing the film, paying the employees, and some other overhead. I know there's going to be people out there that disagree with me on how far you should stray from the original source material and still be able to call it a movie that's based on that original source material. And I think I would agree with them on some things. I mean, the biggest thing for me was the Silent Hill games. I really enjoyed those. They pulled you in, they created that atmosphere, they had a good story, great environment, just, you could picture yourself being there. You could understand how James or Harry or whatever the protagonist was, you felt with them. You understood where they were coming from and kind of why they did what they did. It was very easy to get into. Thankfully, The Borrower'S didn't get too far away from that. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but, you know, what is these days? I don't know. Before I get too distracted, though, let's just get into the movie and you can see what I'm talking about. The movie starts off and introduces us into Pete Lender, who is convinced that something is stealing small items around the house. Now, if this was you, what would you do? Tell your parents? Check. Call an exterminator? Don't be silly. Build miniature death traps that could kill the critters or possibly maim yourself and your parents.
Well, Lottie frickin' da!
When you look at these traps, you can see that some of them are pretty darn gruesome. I mean, how far is too far? Where do you draw the line?
Pete, I'm getting really tired of you leaving all these things around the house. I just can't.
If anything, I guess, it looks like Pete picked up some tips from his early 90s predecessor, Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone. Despite the fact that Pete's parents have a tendency to find these traps more than their intended target, they just kind of dismiss it as regular child activity and they just all continue on with their day. But as it turns out, Pete wasn't completely off. There actually is a small family of little people, the Borrowers, who subsist off humans by borrowing things they need to survive. Kind of like mice, or a parasite, but less damaging or life-threatening. Dude, think about it. Now, there are a few things you need to know about these Borrowers. 1. Borrowers have superhuman strength, apparently. 2. They're impervious to electric shock. 3. Due to their small size, they're pretty weightless, as they can scale the fridge on magnets. 4th, they refer to humans as beans. as they misunderstand the word beings. The little family consists of Pod Clock, Ariete Clock, Homily Clock, and Pea Green Clock. And sadly, it looks like they're the last of the Borrowers. Now wait a second! Pea Green was never in any of the books! Oh gosh!
Objection!
Well, do you even read? Why'd you go to the library and learn yourself a thing or two?
Okay, I'm sorry. Originally when I did this review, I said that Pea Green didn't exist in any of the books. And that's only partially true. At least in the way that's presented in the movie. Apparently, like Crazy said, I went ahead and did some research and found out that there are 8 books in the series. And apparently in the 5th one, that's where you find Pea Green, Borrower's Avenged. In the book, though, Pea Green is named Pea Green Overmantle, and he's somebody else that the Borrowers happen to run into later in the story. He's not their son, but he's another borrower that helps them find another place to live. In an effort to condense the story into movie format, unless they wanted to go all Lord of the Rings on it with 6 or 8 movies, the writers opted to make Pea Green the borrower's son instead. Now, moving on. Oshus P. Potter, played by John Goodman, is a nefarious lawyer, because as we all know, lawyers are the scum of the earth, especially in kids' movies. And that goes double for when you can make big business also look like the devil. Potter is trying to swindle the lenders out of their house and build a massive apartment or business complex in its place. Since the lender's aunt died and left no will, the lenders have no choice but to comply with Potter's demands and be out of the house by Saturday.
You sit around here and you spin your little webs and you think the whole world revolves around you and your money. Well, it doesn't, Mr. Potter.
We go back now to the Borrowers, in particular Ariete, and we find out that she's quite the troublemaker. And during one of her routine expeditions, she manages to knock over a little toy Indian doll and draw Pete's attention. He finds her and catches her. But instead of killing her outright, finds out that she's actually a tiny person and is pretty intrigued with the whole idea. Before letting her go, Pete lets her know that the house is going to be demolished, so they need to move out too unless they want to go down with the ship. Reluctantly, the Clocks decide to go along with it and leave the house. But as this is a kids/adventure movie, something inevitably goes wrong, and Pea Green and Ariete get separated from their parents and find themselves in some pretty deep poop. Haha! I'll be here all week.
That's what I'm afraid of.
But seriously, they are about to get themselves into some pretty deep trouble. Mr. Potter decides to come by the house for some reason, and it looks like he's come down with a really bad case of expositionitis. Symptoms may include, but are not limited to, unnecessary monologuing about finding a mystical MacGuffin plot device, in this case a will, that will be your downfall should anyone discover you denied said MacGuffin's existence. Massive overconfidence that your evil plan will go off without a hitch. Increased suspicion that tiny little people are overhearing your every word, and will, without a doubt, undermine aforementioned evil plan. And an increased desire to shout demands at imaginary people on your highly sophisticated cellular device. If not addressed at an early stage, symptoms may worsen to gradual and or complete loss of sanity, disruption of your evil empire before it's had a chance to fully take root, loss of friends, family, and employment, and permanent residency in a padded room with a fitted white suit. Alright, I've got to take a break here and point a couple things out. First of all, Abigail, the lender's aunt, creates a will and leaves it somewhere in the house. First question, who wrote the will? Did she have Mr. Potter write it? I'm guessing that, yeah, he did. But why go to all the trouble of hiding the will in the house somewhere? Wouldn't it have been easier to just, I don't know, give it to Mr. Potter and have him deliver it to your niece and nephew? Or was Abigail getting wise to Mr. Potter and find out that he's actually a pretty big scumbag and wouldn't come clean on his promises? I mean, if that's the case, then why not take the will from Mr. Potter, rip it up, and tell your niece and nephew directly? Doesn't that make sense? If that's what you thought, then get out. Your logic has no place here. Nope, this 80 or 90-year-old lady decides to buy a safety deposit box and a safe, hide said box and the safe in the wall, plaster over the wall, and decorate it with matching wallpaper from when the house was originally built, supposedly in the early 1900s, and do such a fantastic job that no one would immediately look at the wall and say, hey, does it look like somebody recently did some sort of drywall or sheetrock work here? I wonder if they hid something in the wall. Then, assuming no random person finds it, Just hope your niece and nephew will somehow find it before the evil lawyer does. Arrietty and Pea must now prove themselves as good borrowers and get the will back from Potter before the house is completely replaced with some sort of Pottersville slums. Sadly, Arrietty and Pea also seem to come down with a slight case of expositionitis, as Potter overhears them saying they've got to get away with the will and bring it to Pete. So Potter does what any normal villain would do. He tries to kill them by calling in an exterminator. In this case, Exterminator Jeff. However, inheriting the luck of his early 90s predecessors, Harry and Marv, Potter narrowly avoids death in true Home Alone fashion from threats such as instant hardening, acid burning foam, and possible suffocation, electrocution, burning to death from said electrocution, and just outright death from blunt force trauma in the form of a hammer, which was also the cause of his electrocution, falling from a high height. But of course Potter's not going to let something like death get in his way when there's a fortune to be made. Arrietty and Pea escape the house just in time to miss their parents from trying to find them, with the help of Pete. However, this works to Pete's advantage as he slowly starts putting the picture together that Potter is a conniving scoundrel who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. Good thing Potter and Jeff are about as subtle as a brick to the face and leave so many clues, don't even try in the slightest to hide what they're doing, even though it doesn't do anything for their image of mental stability. Seriously, how do the people of this town look at them going through and not think that something is gravely wrong with them?
Oh, there goes that crazy old man Potter and Jeff again. Wish they'd stop going through town, they're scaring the children. Dagnabbit. See those guys? They've been following me all day!
Well, then, why don't you stop and see what they want?
Away with you and your logic. It has no place here.
Now, I said that nobody really paid attention to Potter and Jeff, and that's not entirely true. There was one person that took quite a liking to them and what they were doing. Officer House. Policeman Laurie. Oh, gosh. What is his name? Officer Steady. Okay. Officer Steady has the uncanny ability to turn up at just the right time, or wrong time depending on whose perspective you're looking at. It's almost like Droopy the dog, always showing up and stopping the wolf at key points, which only leads to aggravate or drive the wolf crazy until he breaks down and pleads to be arrested and taken away, because he's completely lost all will or sanity by Droopy never failing to appear. Mr. Potter quite hasn't reached that breaking point, so we'll put Officer Steady back on the back burner for right now. So, due to all the chasing, running around town, and getting tripped up by Officer Steady, a few things happen. Arrietty and Pea get separated. So Arrietty needs to go find her brother. But how's she gonna go do that? Why, with the help of another borrower, Spud Spiller.
Oh, gosh. I thought you said that the borrowers are all gone. Wasn't that what they said in the beginning of the movie?
I suppose not.
Oh, yeah, I suppose you're telling me that the world isn't flat anymore.
Actually, it's not, and it never was.
No, my life is a lie.
Moving on from that, Spud informs Arrietty that there are indeed more borrowers out there, seeing as he's one of them, and there are two distinctions of borrowers, innies and outies. But they've no time to waste with much more than this because they've got to go save Pea from an untimely death by dairy. Or Hammer because Potter caught up and starts smashing bottles in a mad attempt to kill the borrowers. Still, he's gotta get that will. While desperately trying to catch the borrowers, Potter falls victim to yet another pratfall that he had no possible way of seeing. Guess that loss of sanity's really started to get to him. What's this ramp I'm standing on, and what's that hose for? I guess it's not important. What are those two borrowers doing? That little stunt fails to trip up Potter for too long, but it's just long enough for Mr. and Mrs. Clock to save their son, right before Potter recovers and tries to doom him to the same cheesy fate he just suffered, then just walks away, because nothing could possibly go wrong with his petty revenge plot, right? Unless he runs into Pete and explains his petty revenge just in time for Pete to rush inside and save the little band of borrowers. Nope, that'll never happen. Oh, shucks, would you look at that? Potter, having an influx of confidence after having procured the will, backs over Pete's bike and drives off to demolish the house before anyone else gets in his way. But Potter made a horrible decision in running over Pete's bike, because now Exterminator Jeff has decided to defect over to Pete's side. You can convince me to fill a house with instant hardening foam, smash holes in the wall with a hammer, heck, you can even get me to go along with your wanton desire to destroy property in the form of milk bottles in a dairy plant that has abysmally poor security. But if you've run over a little kid's bike, now you've just crossed the line. Potter races up to the demolition room, which somehow Pete and Jeff got to before him, and mislabeled. Potter rushes inside, gets tied up, gets shouted down by an enormous crowd of borrowers who scurry off in just the nick of time to have good old Officer Steady show up and arrest Potter before laughing just how off his nut he's gone. The borrowers all gather to celebrate moving back into the lender's home and all live happily ever after because yay! Happy Kids movie! So, how does it all hold up? Well, if you're a kid, you're gonna love it. There's tons of laugh, lots of pratfalls, and the bad guy gets put in a padded room for the rest of his life. Yay! Now that I've grown up, I'd still say it's a fun kids movie, and I'm not ashamed to say that it's a good one to pass the time with. Sure, it's corny, but sometimes you just need some corny to break up all the serious and heavy films out there. Yes, it's got its flaws, many of which I skipped due to time, but there are several points where the movie could have just ended, and the borrowers being spotted, or taking another second to examine a situation, breaking out of a mental stupor to foul up the borrowers and get away scot-free. All things considered, though, it's a good movie. You'll enjoy it, at least as long as you're not as curmudgeonly as I am. Thanks for coming by. See you next time.
Red hair, hand-me-down robes, an obsession with things that muggles create and use. You must be a Weasley.
But don't you have red hair? Wouldn't that make you a Weasley?
My father would hear of this.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, want to see something improve, consider donating to my Patreon. A couple bucks a month goes a long way. See you soon.